Yeah, featured review is The Order. Todd, yeah, Adam stepping out for this one. He did not see it yet. This was on Todd's most anticipated list. So, Todd, you're starting it off. Tell us about The Order and what you thought.
Okay, directed by Justin Kurzel. This is the story of the FBI investigation into Bob Matthews, which is played by Nicholas Hoult. And he's the leader of a Pacific Northwest white supremacist militia. And Terry Husk is the lead investigator. That's Jude Law. And he is joined by the likes of Journey Smollett and Tye Sheridan to stop this group, whatever. And they are essentially enacting domestic terrorism by robbing banks and bombing buildings as part of their agenda. And this is a true story that took place in the 1980s, early 1980s. There's a bit of like Killers of the Flower Moon and how it's set up. I thought it was pretty cool. But true stories about bad people all have the same kind of feeling. There's a bit of like the bike riders in this, maybe a little like Black Mass, because it shows like you not only just like the group that they're going after, but also the people around the group and how it like shapes the community. And so it's hard not to think of like Black Klansmen as well when you're watching this. But I think it's a really compelling movie, like giving somewhere around like equal time to both sides is a way to do it, to make it not just like a procedural detective story. And Nicholas Hoult is extraordinary in this. He's believable, he's charismatic, and every actor kind of disappears, especially Jude Law, who has none of the normal Jude Law bullshit that he always does. Like, he's essentially Popeye Doyle in this, and I think it works. He's really good in this. And then there's like Tye Sheridan, who basically is Tye Sheridan, but it fits him like a glove. I mean, it's really similar to his performance in Asphalt City earlier this year. The movie is like a series of like action scenes, which is awesome. It has the intensity of Hell or High Water. And Justin Kurzel makes movies about things that you don't necessarily want to watch, but it's hard to look away from, even though what you're watching is like really horrifying. And that helps him in making these like action scenes while also being faithful to his like gnarly sense of like obsession with violence. And like the movie's making some sort of point about how idealism can take advantage of like directionless people and like pissed off people. Because it's fascinating that when you watch something about the personification of evil, you can still actually understand where they're coming from. And that's something Kurzel has always been exploring in his movies. You have like the line between like the average person and a terrorist is actually pretty thin in his view. Like, you take a point, you create a warped ideology, and it ends in anarchy. And that can happen to anyone, and it will continue happening to anyone as long as, you know, people still exist. There will always be a new group. There's always a new interpretation of the same stuff, a new uprising by whoever feels slighted at the moment. I think it's a really chilling movie, and I think it's like Justin Kurzel's like alpha dog level, like almost masterpiece. It's 3.5 stars.
All right, Zach, what'd you think?
Yeah, so interesting that you bring up the bike riders, because I was thinking quite a bit about the bike riders while watching this movie. You got these guys who are basically kind of aimless and bored in their lives in the past, you know, in this kind of rural America, although this story takes place more in the Pacific Northwest than where the bike riders took place, which I believe was supposed to be around Chicago. But in this movie, they are really not obsessed with bikes, but they are presumably obsessed with this anti-Semitic hate-filled agenda. And what's interesting about the movie is that they are basically a subset of this larger anti-Semitic group that they splinter from. And they are fanatics, they are zealots, but there's this sort of presumption that's kind of interesting in the movie, that is that Nicholas Hoult, I don't know, he's anti-Semitic to be sure, but that's not seems to really drive him. He just seems more driven by the need to kill people and rob banks, and the need to, I guess, rebel against society and express his anger through the ways that all the right-wing, crazies have done in the last few years. And the movie is chilling because essentially these people have won. I mean, they're about to take power again, and I really applaud the filmmaker for using the terminology at the end of the movie. This is exactly what led to the January 6th insurrection. We're going to be living in a world where, you know, we're not allowed to say that again. That's now Patriots Day in the country we're about to live in. This is a movie about the blueprint for America at 2024 and beyond. And what I like about it is that the director doesn't hammer it home. He lets you put two and two together. There is a line where one of the characters says, this is documents, or their ideology is about trying to overthrow the government at federal buildings and at Congress. And I think we get the idea. That's the clearest, most explicit that the movie gets about what it's saying about right-wing terrorism. I agree that the performances are really good. Nicholas Hoult is awesome in this movie. It might even be his best performance. I mean, he has this kind of lean physicality to the role. And I almost thought of like a young Tom Cruise maybe pulling it off. I mean, he's like 6 inches taller than Tom Cruise, but like he's magnetic, but for no other
Who
reason
isn't 6 inches taller than Tom Cruise?
I mean, that's a
Cruise,
a fair point.
baby.
Jude Law is interesting in this movie. Wouldn't have been my first case or first casting. He also has a physicality. There's a scene where he is at a jail and he's interrogating someone who's in prison, and he rubs up against him in a really interesting physical way, which is kind of cool. I really like this movie too. I think Kurzel is a really fascinating director, and I think you touched on it, Todd. He makes movies about men who are driven maybe by ideology, but more by just hatred and boredom. And you're right, there's a fine line between what is fanaticism and what is just the devil is in idle hands, right? I mean, this is a character who is just upset and angry at the world and kind of abandoned by the people that supposedly love him. And there's a nice speech at the end of the movie that Jude Law gives to his wife that sort of underpins that there's actually a real connection between Jude Law and Nicholas Hoult. But again, the movie does it in this kind of subtle, underplayed way, which I think the viewer can kind of glean for themselves about what the connections are between the two characters. I thought also about Heat watching this movie. This is like sort of a Michael Mann movie in a way. It's also pretty freaking entertaining to watch. There's a bank robbery and an armored truck robbery in this movie that is really compelling. And, it's based on true events. And in movies like this, typically I say, well, it's a little unrealistic that things would go that smoothly. But they also talk about why it goes smoothly. I mean, these were guys that got basically military training to kind of pull off and execute the things that they were trying to do. I like also that I thought about Hell or High Water as well. Hell or High Water wanted to make those characters sympathetic. And this movie, again, it kind of books and, we're 8 years removed from 2016, where the Nicholas Hoult and his cadre are not sympathetic at all. There's no sort of liberal socioeconomic reason for why justification or trying to rationalize or understand what they're doing. They're just all out terrible people. Okay. There's no sympathy for them whatsoever watching the movie. Again, they're just bored. They're violent, and they've been cast away not only from their society, but even from their right-wing militaristic fanaticism. Nice cameo appearance from Mark Maron at the beginning. Everybody should check out Talk Radio, the Oliver Stone movie, which is about the Alan Berg killing as well. I like this movie quite a bit. I think I might like it more thinking about it than the actual experience of watching it. It's kind of by the books, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing. Maybe it would have been better released in June rather than December, but I'm also at 3.5 stars. This is a pretty cool movie that I really enjoyed, and actually also might make a nice companion piece of The Bike Riders in a lot of ways, as a more, I think, kind of serious, grounded movie in the reality of this horrible incident that happened not too long ago and is still kind of happening today. So big thumbs up for me too.
Yeah, me too. I'm at 3.5 stars as well. This was a really cool movie that just sucks you in, and you can't help but just be entertained by. Vertical Entertainment put this out, which was the same production studio as Elevation. So there you go, Zach. I like, Todd, I think you're the one that mentioned Black Klansman, and I think that's a good comparison. But I want to also go to something Zach said, where this movie definitely had a message of talking about recent times, but just like you said, as opposed to what Spike Lee did in Black Klansman, where he hammered it over your head, which was my least favorite part of Black Klansman, this one doesn't. This one is very subtle about it and just tells the story and lets you figure out what the message is from that, which I think is, give your audience some credit here. The other movie I thought of, which none of you guys mentioned as I was watching this, is I thought of The Stranger from a couple years ago, where I know, Todd, I know you knew this movie was coming out and you were excited for it, but for the most part, most people we reviewed it because there was nothing else really that came out that we wanted to see. And it's like, well, let's watch this one. It's Todd was excited for it and it's got good reviews. this is again be a forgotten movie that's an awesome movie, just like The Stranger was a forgotten Netflix drop that we all loved. And I'm looking at the box office. This movie isn't even going to make $1 million this weekend. It's 13th at the box office this weekend. And it was one of the big releases, maybe big releases. It's in 600 theaters, but it's a great movie that is just going to get ignored. Jude Law, I love this era of Jude Law because he's another one of those. He's gone the Colin Farrell route where he's forgotten or he's left behind everyone trying to tell him he's a leading man. And he's just going back to being the character actor that he should have been this whole time. But when the character actor is good looking, he's got to be a leading man. Now he's back to what he was doing, and his grizzled old, curmudgeon of an FBI agent is great. Shout out to Journey Smollett. She's always great to see in something too. Tye Sheridan actually gets to be an adult for once, which it was, I think, what the most jarring part of seeing him in this is like he's married with a kid. He's not a high schooler like he's been for the last 15 years. So that was good to see, even though it was a little jarring. And Nicholas Hoult, I mean, the year Nicholas Hoult is having, Zach, you said this might be his best performance. Well, other people are saying his best performance might be Juror Number 2, which none of us have seen yet, or his best performance might be Nosferatu, which we haven't seen yet. All of them came out this year. And then you go back last year, he had Renfield. The year before that, he had The Menu. He still has The Great going on too. And he is just having a great moment right now and showing that he's one of the best actors we got right now. And he just needs to keep going. So yeah, 3.5 stars. I really, really enjoyed this one too.
Yeah, one thing that I mean, so basically we all agree. I'm just saying I like these movies that seem like very American stories, but they're made by people that are not American because they can have an objective view of things. And like these are all not like Jude Law, Nicholas Hoult, Justin Kurzel. These are not Americans, and they make this movie that is so uniquely American, but also universal because like these problems exist all over the world, and they have the same things going on in Australia and in Europe and whatnot. So I just think that like similar to like She Said or something like that, like you make these American stories by a non-American, it gives it a more of an objective view, and I like that.
Kind of, you can kind of say it's like Civil War in that sense too, where
Sure.
Civil War could have easily become just like propaganda one way or the other, and it was just it's not about one side or the other, it's about the story of it.
Yeah, but see, Civil War is what kind of you were saying about Spike Lee. I think Alex Garland had a very clear agenda in that movie. We love the journalists, and we need journalists now more than ever. And this movie, it does have an agenda. I mean, I think it is very clear in pointing out the violent nature and just the ignorance and the awfulness that these people represent, and how their motivations are born out of really nothing. Not even really ideology behind it, or an empty ideology, because all they want to do is just be violent. But the movie lets you figure that out for yourself. What I like about it too is that it's not like an overdone Oscar movie. Like this is like a genre movie. It's a modest movie that looks great. There's no over the top sensationalistic acting or scenes in it. There's no great monologues in it. It doesn't try to do anything overly cinematic, except for just tell a very clear story that is gripping and maybe even unexpectedly so. I almost watched this movie and I sort of doubted it at first. I'm like, oh, I've seen these procedurals like a few too many times, but I found the movie surprisingly engrossing, and you get into it, and the movie has some really nice payoffs. The scene where they first encounter each other at the lake is a great scene. A few years ago, we had a great shot from the Banshees of Inisherin. Well, there's also a shot in this movie of someone in a burning building that is also an amazing, kind of paradoxical and very open-ended shot, the meaning of it. It's just a cool movie. I really enjoyed it. I don't think people are going to watch it because it's not sexy or flashy or anything like that, but it's just a well-made procedural, which is kind of a mark of death to say, but it does what it does exceptionally well, better than most other movies. And Kurzel is a really talented director. It did remind me of Nitram, and what was the other one that he did? The Snowtown Brothers. Like, just how the banality of these people and their conversations, how you've probably met people like this, but you don't really know how the depths to which they're at in their depravity. So just kind of cool and chilling.
Watching this at a theater in the Puget Sound area was kind of fun because it all took place in Washington, Idaho, Montana. And it gets
Very
to a point at
clearly
the
shot
end
there.
where it says we're now on Whidbey Island, and when it showed that, there were definitely a few from the odd, like some like definite little chuckles, like we know where that is. Yeah.
Well, I think it was shot in Canada, so it wasn't actually there, right?
I mean,
don't
it looked
know,
it
but
looked like the
still it was.
Northwest.
It did look like the Pacific Northwest. Yeah.
Trying to make a story set in Washington that you film in Vancouver makes a whole lot more sense than a story
It
you
was
try to
shot in
set in like
Alberta.
Texas and film in Vancouver. Alberta, same thing. I mean, if you're Alberta, Montana, basically, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so 3.5 from all of us, correct?
Quad
Sounds like
quad
I missed out.
majorly approved, or thrice approved for now. Adam will like this movie.
Thrice approved.
For sure.
Should be quad approved when Adam watches it. I
Sounds like
don't know
I missed
how long it's going to be in theaters, and it's not in every theater. Like I said, Moana 2 is in 4,200 theaters. The Order is in, what did I say, 600? 600.